They arrested her without a shred of evidence. They rushed her through the system with cold efficiency, setting her bail at a staggering $10,000 until a single phone call changed everything. The late summer heat hung in the air, thick and heavy, as Jessica Carter carefully stepped out of her modest apartment. The sun beat down relentlessly, pressing into her skin like hot iron. She had just one simple task: grab a loaf of bread and some milk from Mike's Market and get back home before the ache in her joints became unbearable. Walking wasn't easy these days, but she wasn't the type to loiter. Especially not here. It wasn't danger that kept her moving swiftly. No, it was something else. Something quieter, but just as real. She had lived in Granton for decades, watched it change, watched it become something new, something that barely resembled the community she once knew. Being a 70-year-old black woman in a predominantly white, rapidly gentrified neighborhood meant she had to be extra careful. Always. It was like walking a tightrope, and she had memorized the rules by heart. Keep your hands where they can see them. Don't linger too long in any aisle. No sudden movements. And most importantly, never ever give them a reason. The moment she stepped inside the store, a blast of air conditioning wrapped around her like a sigh of relief. The small shop was packed, shelves overflowing with snacks, canned goods, and humming refrigerators lining the back wall. Mike, the owner, acknowledged her with a brief nod from behind the counter, but her eyes flickered toward a man in a navy polo standing near the exit. His stance was stiff, his gaze sharp, scanning every person in the aisles like he was waiting for someone. Jessica moved with quiet purpose, making her way to the dairy section, her fingers brushing over the cold surface of a milk carton before placing it in her basket. She turned toward the front when something caught her eye. A young man in a gray hoodie. She barely had time to register what was happening before he stuffed several energy bars into his pockets and made a break for it. He moved fast, eyes darting wildly toward the exit. The door swung open. The electronic chime barely had time to fade before the alarm exploded through the store. Jessica froze. Mike shot up from his stool, cursing under his breath. The man near the door reacted in an instant, his sharp gaze scanning the store before locking onto her. "You." His voice sliced through the chaos like a blade. Jessica blinked, confused. "What?" But he was already moving, his hand clamping down on her thin arm. "Let go of me," she gasped, trying to yank away, but his grip was like steel. "Don't move." That's when she saw it, the badge clipped to his belt. An off-duty cop. A cold wave of dread washed over her. "The guy ran that way," she protested, her voice rising in desperation. She turned toward Mike, silently pleading for help, for confirmation. Mike hesitated, his brows furrowed. But he said nothing. Jessica's pulse pounded against her ribs. This wasn't happening. This couldn't be happening. But the officer wasn't listening. He didn't care. He wrenched her arms behind her back. "You think you're slick?" he muttered. "I didn't steal anything." Click. The cold bite of handcuffs snapped around her frail wrists. Customers watched. Some whispered. Some pulled out their phones. But no one, not a single person, stepped forward. A siren wailed in the distance. The ride to the station felt endless. Jessica sat stiff in the back seat, wrists aching, her heart slamming against her chest like a drum. The officer driving had barely said a word after shoving her inside. Just radioed in a suspect in custody and kept his eyes on the road. Jessica wanted to scream, make him listen. But something told her it wouldn't matter. The station loomed ahead, a gray, windowless building that reeked of sweat and old paper. The moment she stepped inside, a uniformed officer yanked her forward, leading her past rows of desks, ringing phones, and officers who barely spared her a glance. Her sensible flats squeaked against the linoleum as she was brought before a tall, broad-shouldered cop, his badge read Sergeant Hawkins. He barely looked up from his clipboard. "Shoplifting," he muttered, uninterested. "Got her at Mike's Market." The arresting officer, *** Detective Owen Carter, *** replied. Owner didn't see the act, but she was the only one near the shelf when the alarm went off. Jessica stiffened. "That's not true." Carter's grip tightened on her shoulder. Hard enough to silence her. Camera footage? Hawkins asked. Didn't check yet, Carter admitted, giving a lazy shrug. But she fits the description. Jessica's stomach twisted. Description? That boy had been wearing a gray hoodie. She was standing there in a blue floral dress. It didn't matter. Hawkins barely reacted. He just scribbled something down and nodded toward an open doorway. Take her to processing. Jessica tried again, her voice trembling. I didn't steal anything. Check the cameras. Ask Mike. Carter ignored her. He yanked her forward, dragging her toward a small room where an officer stood waiting. Camera in hand. Mugshot. Fingerprints. A form shoved in front of her to sign. This wasn't happening. But it was. Shaking hands, then they led her to a cold metal bench replacing the cuffs. With zip ties, and left her there. She wasn't in a cell, just a waiting area. With a few others slumped against the walls, all looking just as lost. Minutes passed, then an hour. Would Jamal even know where she was? He was always working. Always too busy. Would anyone know? Would anyone care? Or would she just vanish into the system, buried under paperwork? Forgotten, behind cold concrete walls. A door creaked open. The scent of stale coffee and cheap cologne filled the air. A public defender in a wrinkled suit stepped in, eyes scanning the folder in his hands as if he had barely glanced at it before walking in. Jessica Carter, he asked without looking up, flipping through the pages with rapid indifference. Her throat was dry. Yes, he sat down, already tapping his pen against the folder. You've been charged with shoplifting and resisting arrest. Jessica stiffened. That's not. I'm here to represent you for the arraignment, he cut in, already moving on, as if her innocence or guilt were nothing more than a formality. Your hearing is first thing. I